Hello everybody and most welcome to H733. We are presently in the lässal of Vårgårda Library. Very generously the staff of the library here has allowed us our presence here. And I already notice it's a very good speaking environment. There's no echo. And actually the voice is traveling quite good. I will talk today about Sous, rature. I don't know properly the French pronunciation. French is not my language. And I will take the dixis, the start from a path. We will start talking about the path. And the path is here, and it could be looked at from two different perspectives. This is sort of a generalized view of how could it be to understand a path. The first view you could take is the so-called egocentric view. And that means that you put yourself into the position in the path. That means that you walk the path step by step and you will see things on the way and you get an understanding from a personal viewpoint. And that's called the egocentric view. The other view is the Alucentric view. I've written here a little arrow and point, but the Alucentric view doesn't have a dixis, it doesn't have a start. And that's very important. And if you take the Alucentric view, you see reality from a distance also. Unknown distance, unknown dxis. And that makes another view, both of the path taken, because from a distance everything becomes more distinct in a way. You can perceive them as being more thingy. And you can see sameness and you can see difference. Whereas you walk this path that is egocentrical, you will see a lot of nearer things. That's the close view. And the close view makes reality very, very different. Everything becomes completely different. You can't see sameness, and it will not be to the same amount. Distinctions. Distinctions, it's something you take afar. And it is vaguely similar to abstraction and being in the world directly, or direct perception, or naive realism. You could call this naive realism, because everything you see around you, you will perceive directly. And time will be stepwise here, whereas here you have a time that looks more like a line outside the whole thing. And this is a way of perceiving the world that's very interesting. For instance, Heidegger took it up several times, and one of the most famous one is the Homecoming. It's a poem of Fichte, was it? Yeah. Fichte, and he talks about how it is to come home. And the wanderer, he experienced directly firsthand tiredness, thirst, the environment, different smells, the different air. In this poem you get the idea that the home is a bit elevated, maybe halfway on a mountain, because the wanderer describes the walk as arduous. He gets sweaty and he takes a break halfway. And here are very important traits in the egocentric way, because here you understand your own feelings, like the longing, which is very important, the longing for the home. That becomes an integral part of the experience. And another very important thing that you don't find in the allocentric view is that you have a sense both of distance, you have a sense of time, whereas the allocentric view, everything is in an order, so to speak, but everything takes place simultaneously. So those different takes are indeed two perspectives that we human beings often take. And oddly enough, this could be applied to text. You can see a text like a path. So you walk the path of the text like this, and you can choose to read the text and its contents in an egocentric way, but you can also do it in an allocentric way. The allocentric way is the distant way. An example could be two different people reading the same book, or could actually be the same person reading in two different perspectives. First, he reads the book egocentrically, that is, he's enjoying the book. He's reading it as a reader or nothing else. He goes into the book, he experiences the timeline, he walks the path of the text, he goes into the text. So imagination becomes very strong and it gets very close. The closeness does that everything becomes very distinct in the book. One chapter doesn't look like the other chapter, and actually a couple of lines and a paragraph doesn't look like the next paragraph. Everything is, in a way, very, very real and very near. You get this perspective if you look at something very close. Like here, I look at my hand, and I will only see these lines I have in the hand that, for instance, a fortune teller would have a look at. That's the close perspective. Whereas to see my whole body, I need an allocentric view, because from no position where I am can I see my whole body. Not even in a mirror. Even in a mirror, I can only see the front part. So what could be an allocentric reading of a book? I have to ask Kalle here because this is a very good question.
So you mean what was this is allocentric, so to say?
Yes, allocentric outside at a distance. What could that book reading be?
So you are more passive, so to say.
In a way, you're more passive because you are distant. So there is a passivity built in.
No, I could use the things that I know, Greek New Testament, for instance. So you have we can say that you have the text here, so to say.
Yes.
It flows beside your eyes. So who has, so to say, decided the way or put the way there or the text? It is the editors, so to say.
Yes.
The more editors who have, so to say, manipulated the manuscripts. So you have our text here. So it's actually the editors who are active while the reader is passive. From my point of view, but I don't know. So, what is your question?
No.
Can you?
No, it's very interesting, actually. Thank you very much, Kalle. You get the drift. I was actually thinking, and it's obviously because I'm reading on the back side here, and this is no resume here. Here is actually critics who read the book. And an allocentric view could be a critic reading the book. Somebody who reads as the authority of a reviser or reviewer. But your view was quite as interesting, and especially was something I didn't think of, so that adds to the whole stuff. But as a reviewer, you are more likely to see the chapters to be more similar. You see similar trends going on, and all of a sudden you are at a distance reading the book. You don't, in the same way, get caught up in the action. And that of course goes for watching the cinema, going to theater, seeing art. And of course, when I say this, this could be also a change. You could start reading the book as an egocentric reader, and then you can jump to Alucentric reader. But there is a very, very sharp thing when it comes to book, for instance. Jumping in between them, that could be tiresome, I can imagine. Once you're caught up in the book, you don't want to leave the book. You are actually in the book. So, and of course, this type of reading is less enjoyable because you read it at a distance. You're not partaking. It's like being, you're welcome to a party. You can come at 5 o'clock Sunday afternoon. It's going to be an afternoon tea at the Royals. This actually happens. The Queen invites people for a royal tea on Sundays. I think it's usually in the summer because it's outside. But only the most prominent people are here. The rest can stand and look at the whole thing. And even though it's rather fantastic, even to be onlooker, it's not the same as being, for instance, the Duke of Nottingham and be able to walk the path of the tea party and experience the hours between 4 and 6, usually 4 and 6, and being with the royals, not only see them at a distance. But that's very interesting, and it's those things that is how we act in space. And of course this also rings some true when it comes to these things I mentioned, I think like 40, 50 lectures ago, maybe 100, by decontextualization. If you have a scene, usually we mention this hunting scene that the caveman, let's call him Urk. The caveman makes a hunting scene, something he saw the day before. He's very eloquent when he does his drawing, it looks fantastic. And then a couple of days later he comes back to the drawing and he takes a part of the drawing, for instance just the buffaloes, and he puts them underneath. And by doing that, he's no longer depicting the hunting scene. He's no longer in the scene. He's gotten a bit further away. He had put himself at a distance. And the most interesting thing, he does that literally. He actually back off a couple of meters, have a look-see at the scene and see what he can take away. It would be very hard while you're drawing the buffalo or the hunters or the trees or whatever they draw to take away some parts. You actually back physically. And that's the point. It's in reality this happens. You back off and you see, I will decontextualize. And without a doubt, the first time this happened, that was an accident. Maybe he wanted to make another scene and he noticed while drawing the second scene, he could do something completely different. He could decontextualize. He could take out just the buffaloes. And you have to understand that as the caveman, for them the whole thing was one presence. It was not divided into hunters, buffaloes, environment, and intention. Now we're talking even more get together than the people in the Iliad and the Odyssey. Because for the Stone Age people, everything was a whole. It's very hard to imagine what sort of language they had, but maybe one word corresponded to a whole sentence for us, something like that. There are some languages in Amazon are like that. And to hunt one buffalo in the afternoon, 12 o'clock, 3 weeks ago, it's one word. And to hunt buffaloes 12 o'clock, but 4 buffaloes instead of 3, it's a completely different word. And they don't look anyway the same. They look completely different. Whereas in our language, they have a lot of similarities and only one little difference. So you can see our language is much more at a distance in a way, whereas the caveman language is very close by. You are walking the path, you are in the reality. And this is actually this buffalo scene and the lava skull cave, because we can actually date it. We know somewhere there in the vicinity of 30,000 years ago, 28,000 years ago, this process started. It was not present before. It spread. If it spread from one source to the many, we don't know. But my bet would be it only started in one place and then it spread. A little bit like the alphabet, because the alphabet was almost only invented once. It was not two-time thing. It did all over the world. It did actually happen several times, but in one world, as was connected in those times, only happened one time, and the rest were copies, or related, maybe is a better word. Of course, Schildskrift is not related to any of these, but there are exceptions. So this is what happens when you start to manipulate space, and this is happening within space. It remains space. You do things in space that affect space, and of course you also have different timelines. So at the same time, the Stone Age person Urk, he decontextualized for the first time. By recontextualizing, he can put a new timeline. He can make a timeline. Because for the Stone Age person, a timeline wouldn't mean anything, because everything happened at the same time. But by recontextualizing, like taking out the things and put them in new order, you can actually create a timeline. And that's also more allocentric than egocentric, because there are levels. And I would also like to put that within the context of a peregrinage. We go to some sanctity of some sort. The walking is very important. It always have been very important. And that's a thing that recurs in many different cultures all over the world. If you get there by car, if you get there by flight, it's not valid. It has to be a walk. And the reason being, you don't get the egocentric worldview otherwise. And the perception of the sanctity will never ever be anything the same if you go by flight, because then you have an allocentric worldview. And this is what, for instance, Barbara Tversky has shown, that reality is dependent on this thing. Take a flight to somewhere and you will not have the same world anymore. And it's proven the experience is completely different. It's allocentric then. So the reason, even in those days when the peregrinage started in Europe, I don't know if the Romans had their peregrinage. I assume they had. People going to Delphi or some of the sort. The peregrinage put you into the atmosphere of being present. And that always takes time. It's not something that can happen instantly. While you're walking, you become more and more close to the things that are the reality. You stop seeing everything as sameness and difference. Instead, you have this direct perception of reality. And this is, in a way, often more close to what is the core of life. You want to visit the core of life. And the further you go on the peregrinage, the more time you take to get into that atmosphere, the more clear the experience and the reality will be when you get there. And nota bene, for Barbara Tversky and Heidegger, it's not a different inward experience. It's the reality that changed. The reality is different. It becomes, for the wanderer in the poem, it becomes sanctity. The home becomes sanctity. But would he have rushed there? It would not be a sanctity anymore. It would be an Alucentric general view, more of a view. And that is what you would do if you were a tax collector, or maybe you were an architect and you want to change the house from the outside, build other houses, or maybe you're writing a book about different houses in the neighborhood, close to the house of the wanderer. So you see the difference here. And there is constantly this play between the Alucentric and the egocentric view in a text as well. And I would say it's in this area Sous, rature comes in, because it is sort of a decontextualization. Because if you walk the path, now we have to assume you take an egocentric walk over the text, you will get sort of obsessed with something. I won't take the word stuck, but you get into a certain meaning. And that meaning is a combination of the allocentric sort of feeling you had before you start reading the text, because that has a significant effect. You can actually have the effect from the whole world outside, and that will tell the meaning of the text, and it becomes, even if you're in the text, it becomes sameness. And in order to get rid of this sameness, to be closer to the text, because the closer you get to the text, the less same it becomes. Just as when I look at my hand, it becomes less and less an object, becomes less as a designated form of her hand. It becomes particulars, and they're all very different. Actually, inside the hand, nothing is similar. We don't even have words for those things. So the egocentrical path in the text, that is actually something we need to achieve. And this is what you can do by going into the text more deep. And I would say that's Sous, rature, when you take an under meaning of the same meaning. You can also block it out completely. Heidegger did that, and say you have the meaning, but you also do not have the meaning. You have something else. And this something else is the closeness of the word. You really get into the word. One can look at the same thing with the poem. If you have a favorite poem, every time you read it, if your reading is egocentrical, it will be different. But the more you are, I think it's very common these days especially. I don't think it was that common in the olden days, but these days we often get too much into the allocentric view, because that's the view of media, that's the view of the educational system. That's partly the reason that we have given rid of traditions, why the canon of the Western culture is gone today. Nobody really reads Shakespeare carefully, which is a shame. But if you think of it, it's actually quite amazing. Why don't people read it? It's just amazing. It's so much joy to read it. I think in this process, we become so allocentric, so we cannot get into the feeling of being on the path, because that's what you need to do with Shakespeare. As soon as you start reading it mechanically, allocentric, it becomes boring. It becomes sameness. And I think this is a very good example. I don't praise myself for that. That's actually thanks to, what's his name now? The Closing of the Western Mind.
Bloom, Alan Bloom.
Alan Bloom. Alan Bloom constantly goes back to Shakespeare. And the reason he is the least Alucentric author of all times, because his poems, his sonnets, they open up to so much different readings. So you get one line under one line under one line, and it struck me every time I read it, it's fresh. It's completely anew. And this is what something Shakespeare did. He has a method of writing that if you get into the text, it will renew itself in the most wondrous way. And that, I would say, is a Sous, rature, because you change the meaning constantly. And this changing of the meaning, you have to understand, that's what makes the word really distinct, really meaningful. Because if you have only one meaning, the word becomes blurred. It becomes unclear. It doesn't carry force. So, allocentric viewpoint at a distance, it has its reasons, and it should be used sometimes, but at other sometimes it shouldn't be used. We need to make a choice. And I think we got stuck in one viewpoint, and this is a way of helping us to refresh the text, because you become weary, you become blasé, as we say in Swedish. I don't know if what the good word is in English, but blasé is like you get tired of it. You see sameness wherever you go. And I actually felt when I went to this library, and I went through the library and I looked at titles, I look at the folders, and I say everything is same, there's no difference. I'm one of those people, I can't be bothered anymore to put the TV on, because everything is sameness for me. That's the allocentric viewpoint. And I think this is something that happens to us more in modern times. It was complained by a lot of philosophers and thinkers, authors mainly. Chekhov did it, Dostoevsky did it even more, this boredom. And I think that's a stuckness in the allocentric viewpoint. And once you start to understand we have two viewpoints at least, you will be more able to change your viewpoint, because if you only have one viewpoint, or you're not aware there are alternatives, in some way you are really bound to stick with allocentric, because you won't survive in the climate of today if you don't have that. But the good thing, you can have the allocentric and the other one. There's no rules against it. The only thing is you need the knowledge about it, how it works. And well, I promised I should start with Barbara Tversky, but she kept me awake all night again. And it's so interesting. She shows that maybe we become stuck in a movement pattern, and being stuck in a movement pattern with a specific attitude to the life and everything, we are not able to change from allocentric to egocentric at will anymore. Of course, if you go to the cinema, and of course if we take a grand book like the Brothers Karamazov, and you go to vacation and bring it, in the end you will get into it. But I bet you there's a lot of people, almost all of us, when you're working, when you are in everyday life, when you are in Das Man, you don't see different perspective, and you perceive Das Man to be something that threatens you, something that threatens to erase you. That is what happened to the text as well. It gets erased in a bit. And in that process of erasure, also you get erased. This is what we feel in modern times. We become erased. And why is that? Well, all of a sudden, we take an allocentric viewpoint on ourselves, and we get stuck with that, because that is the word from Das Man. But it's not intended from the Das Man. That's just the common speak. She shows us the way because she gives us a toolbox. And for every new toolbox, you get new tools to help you open up reality. And it's quite amazing. I'm as happy as when I get my Meccano when I was younger. And I know with a Meccano I could do loads of different things. I could make a truck, I can make a building, I could make a bridge, a boat, even a skyscraper if you got that extra Meccano plus. This is a Meccano. This is the first opening of...
Mekano?
Yes. This is the first opening of a toolbox that could help you. And I think this is that Harold Bloom wanted. Because if we had this tool, we wouldn't have deserted Shakespeare. Because as the Alucentric viewpoint shuts Shakespeare up. And what happens in the end, what Harold Bloom does, Alan Bloom does, is that he doesn't mean it. He knows that Shakespeare is great. He knows that is the best thing that ever happened to humanity when it comes to literature. But the tone of the voice gets us people who are allocentric to think it's a chore. It's a must. It's nothing seductive with it. And it's almost like you say to a kid who wants to have some, for instance, some cookies or something like that. And they say to the kid that, no, those cookies are really bitter. They're salty cookies that's only adults like. That would stop them from eating the cookies. That was intentional. But I think Bloom, unintentional by not giving people the tools, giving them the Meccano that could help them to open up the text, to walk the path into the text and enjoy it. Because if you once more can enjoy the text, nothing can stop you. Nothing can stop you from getting into Shakespeare. You won't be able to resist it. And for me, it's almost sacrilege. I know that's not what Bloom means, but it's almost sacrilege to force Shakespeare on anyone, because it's such a delight. It's pure heaven on earth. It's closer you can get to paradise than most priests would do in their sermons. What they describe is dull in the comparison to what Shakespeare describes. And especially when his text is so vibrant, so multifaceted, so alive, so far from anything monosemic, but at the same time being so much more forceful and strong. This is the toolbox of my life. I think I'm going to round off her, and I say thank you very much for joining me today, and I bid you good evening, actually. Bye-bye.
Thank you.